Out of, I think it's about 300 songs that John and I wrote together, we never had a dry session.
Paul McCartney has spent more than 6 decades creating music that touches hearts around the world. Unlike many songwriters who focus on technical skill or clever wordplay, McCartney has a special gift for writing melodies that speak directly to human emotion. His songs carry warmth and hope, turning simple everyday words into something that lasts forever. He was the melody maker of the Beatles, always keeping their music grounded in human feeling, even when the band experimented with new sounds. When tensions grew between the members, he worked to maintain their harmony. Even after the Beatles ended, he never stopped believing in what they had created together. Throughout his long career, McCartney has written thousands of songs that have touched millions of lives. But among all those compositions, 5 Beatles songs hold the most special place in his heart. These tracks represent different aspects of his journey as an artist and as a person. They show his faith, his connection to home, his vulnerability, his collaborative spirit, and his fundamental optimism about life. The first of these deeply personal songs is Let It Be. This track came to McCartney during one of the most difficult periods of his life, both personally and professionally. The song originated from a dream he had about his mother, Mary McCartney, who had died when Paul was just 14 years old. In the dream, his mother appeared to him during a time when he was struggling with various troubles. She spoke words of comfort, telling him that everything would be all right and that he should let things unfold naturally rather than fighting against them. When McCartney woke from this dream, the melody was complete in his mind. The words seemed to flow naturally, as if they were always meant to exist. He immediately went to his piano and played what he remembered from the dream. As he worked on the song, he felt as though his mother was still present in the room with him, offering the comfort and guidance that she had provided when he was young. This deeply personal experience became the foundation for what would be one of the Beatles' most beloved songs. The timing of Let It Be was significant. It became the Beatles' final single, released during a period when the band was falling apart. Arguments had become frequent, and lawyers were getting involved in their affairs. The atmosphere was chaotic and painful for everyone involved. Yet this song served as a reminder of why they had started making music in the first place, why their art mattered more than business disputes or money. Recording the song was an emotional experience for the entire band. McCartney's voice carried years of both pain and healing. The gospel-influenced feel of the arrangement came naturally, transforming what could have been just another pop song into something more profound. It felt like a hymn or a prayer set to music, something that transcended any single individual's experience. The piano melody was deliberately simple, but perfectly suited to the message. McCartney wasn't trying to show off his technical abilities or impress anyone with complexity. Instead, he let pure emotion flow through his playing. He wanted the song to feel like a mother's embrace, something warm and safe, in a world that often feels cold and uncertain. When McCartney performs Let It Be live, the experience always feels sacred to him. Audiences sing along as if they're participating in something spiritual. He often sees people crying in the front rows, not from sadness, but from recognition. Everyone has lost someone they loved, and everyone needs to hear the message that things will be okay. The song has provided comfort to millions of people worldwide, playing at funerals, weddings, hospitals, and graduation ceremonies. McCartney succeeded in turning his personal grief into universal hope, showing that letting go doesn't mean giving up. Sometimes it means trusting that life will work out as it should. The second song that holds special meaning for McCartney is Penny Lane. This track represents something different from Let It Be. Rather than being about loss and comfort, Penny Lane was about memory and home. The song wasn't trying to be clever or show off the band's sophistication. Instead, it was about returning to where everything began, back to the Liverpool streets where McCartney grew up, back to when his world was small and everything seemed possible. Penny Lane is an actual street in Liverpool, and McCartney walked it every day as a child. He knew every detail of the neighborhood, the barber shop, the bank, the bus stop. Every character mentioned in the song was based on real people he remembered from his youth. The fireman with the hourglass and the banker in his motor car weren't just creative lyrics, they were actual neighbors, people who had shaped his understanding of the world before fame changed everything. Creating the recording felt like building a time machine to McCartney. He wanted every instrument to contribute to telling the story of his childhood. The trumpet solo wasn't merely decorative, it represented the sound of happiness itself. The harmonies weren't just pleasant to hear, they symbolized brotherhood and friendship. Every detail mattered because he was putting his entire childhood onto vinyl, creating a gift for anyone who had ever felt nostalgic for their youth.
The song became more than just nostalgia. It became a form of escape for listeners. People who had never been to Liverpool could visit Penny Lane through the music. They could feel the warmth and safety of knowing everyone's name in your neighborhood. McCartney had created a place, in song, where summer lasted forever, where nothing bad ever happened, and where friends never moved away. When McCartney performs Penny Lane live, he always smiles because he can see audiences dreaming of their own special places. The song connects him to fans across multiple generations because everyone has somewhere they want to return to, somewhere that feels like home. For McCartney, this song proves that the smallest, most specific details can create the biggest emotional responses. It shows that growing up doesn't require forgetting your origins, and that sometimes the best way to move forward is by looking back with love rather than regret. The third song on McCartney's list of favorites is Yesterday. This track has an unusual origin story. McCartney woke up one morning with a complete song already in his head. Every note was there, every word felt right. He rushed to his piano, worried the melody might disappear before he could capture it. What emerged was one of the most honest things he had ever written, a song so personal that it actually frightened him to share it with others. At first, McCartney thought he must have unconsciously stolen the melody from somewhere else. It seemed too perfect, too complete to be something he had created. He played it for friends and asked if they recognized it from anywhere. Nobody did, but everyone felt as though they should have. It was the kind of song that felt like it had always existed, as if McCartney had simply discovered it rather than composed it. The other Beatles didn't quite know how to approach Yesterday. It was too melancholy, too slow, and too different from their usual sound. John Lennon and George Harrison couldn't find natural places for their contributions. Ringo Starr had nothing to play on drums, so McCartney recorded it alone, accompanied only by a string quartet. This marked his first solo moment within the band, with his voice exposed and vulnerable against classical instrumentation. The song quickly became something that transcended the Beatles themselves. Other artists immediately began recording their own versions, each finding their own pain reflected in McCartney's words. The song wasn't just about lost romantic love anymore. It became about lost time, lost opportunities, lost people, and lost versions of yourself that you could never recover. Everyone had their own yesterday that they couldn't escape. McCartney still performs the song differently each time he plays it. Sometimes his interpretation is quiet and broken, sometimes strong and accepting. The melody remains constant, but the emotion shifts. That's because Yesterday isn't really just one song. It represents every regret that anyone has ever carried, every moment they wish they could relive or change. For McCartney, this song demonstrates that vulnerability creates genuine connection with audiences. The songs that frighten you most to share are often exactly the ones that people most need to hear. The fourth favorite is A Day in the Life, which represents a different kind of achievement. This song wasn't supposed to work at all. McCartney had one musical fragment, and John Lennon had another. They were two different stories with two different moods, and there was no obvious way to connect them. But somehow, in the magical way that defined the Beatles at their best, These separate pieces found each other and merged into something revolutionary. Lennon's section came from reading newspaper stories. He saw an article about a car crash and another about potholes in the road. He transformed these mundane news items into poetry, turning everyday tragedy into something beautiful through melody. His vocal performance was distant and dreamlike, as though he was reporting from another dimension. McCartney immediately recognized that this wasn't just another Lennon composition. It was something deeper that needed careful handling to reach its full potential. McCartney's section was completely different in character. It was upbeat and energetic, full of life and forward motion. It described a man getting ready for work, catching a bus, living an ordinary day. But when they combined these two contrasting parts, something magical happened. The ordinary and the cosmic collided. Life and death, daily routine and deep mystery, all held together by the famous orchestral crescendo that still gives listeners chills decades later. Recording the orchestral section was both chaotic and brilliant. They gathered 40 classical musicians and gave them one simple instruction: start at the lowest note your instrument can play and end at the highest, but how you get from one to the other is entirely up to you. The result was unlike anything anyone had ever heard before. It wasn't quite classical music, and it wasn't quite rock, but something entirely new that could only belong to the Beatles.
This song proved that the Beatles weren't just a pop band anymore. They'd become genuine artists and experimenters, dreamers who could take creative risks and make them succeed. Radio stations initially didn't know what to do with such an unusual track. Some critics called it pretentious, while others immediately recognized it as genius. But McCartney knew they had created something special, something that demonstrated what four friends could accomplish when they trusted each other completely. For him, a day in the life represents the peak of musical collaboration, when individual talents combine to create something greater than their sum. The final song on McCartney's list is Here Comes the Sun, which holds a unique position because it wasn't even his own composition. George Harrison wrote it during a break from stressful business meetings and band tensions. He sat in Eric Clapton's garden with an acoustic guitar on the first warm day of spring, and what emerged was pure joy. When McCartney heard it, he immediately recognized something special. This was what the Beatles were supposed to sound like when everything else felt complicated and difficult. Harrison had always been the quietest member of the band, the spiritual seeker who found peace in simple things. This song captured all of that in just 3 minutes. The lyrics were almost childlike in their happiness, but that simplicity made them perfect. After years of complex musical arrangements and heavy thematic content, here was something that simply celebrated being alive. McCartney instantly knew this was Harrison's masterpiece, and he felt proud to help make it real. Recording Here Comes the Sun felt therapeutic for the entire band. The usual tensions melted away as they worked on the vocal harmonies. McCartney's bass lines moved playfully around Harrison's guitar work, like old friends reconnecting. The Moog synthesizer added new colors that nobody had heard in popular music before, but it never overwhelmed the song's gentle right. Everyone in the studio could sense they were capturing something special, something that would outlast all their arguments and legal difficulties. The song became a source of comfort for countless people. Radio stations played it during difficult times. Wedding planners used it for mourning ceremonies. Hospital patients requested it during treatment. McCartney watched it heal people in ways he never expected. Harrison had written something that transcended music and became almost medicinal, a reminder that no matter how dark things become, spring always returns eventually. McCartney still gets emotional when he performs this song live, not because it's sad, but because it's so purely hopeful. In a catalog filled with love songs and revolutionary anthems, this simple celebration of sunshine stands out. It reminds him why they started making music in the first place, not to become famous or wealthy, but to make people feel better about being human. These 5 songs together represent the core of what McCartney values most in music and in life. Let It Be represents faith and the power of finding peace. Penny Lane represents home and the importance of remembering your roots. Yesterday represents honesty and the courage to be vulnerable. A day in the life represents collaboration and what friends can achieve together. Here Comes the Sun represents hope and optimism about the future. Together, they explain why the Beatles continue to matter decades after they stopped performing together. They show how music can transform personal experience into something universal that connects people across generations and cultures.